May every woman listening tonight be surrounded by grace, dignity, and unshakable courage, because what you're about to hear will remind you that a woman's spirit cannot be broken, her worth cannot be measured, and her strength always rises above every storm. The traffic light glowed red against the deepening evening sky, and Karen Scott hummed softly to herself, her fingers drumming against the steering wheel in time with the melody playing on the radio. The grocery bags in her back seat held ingredients for Andrew's favorite meal, the pasta dish she had perfected over their years together, the one that always made him smile and pull her into his arms with that look that said she was his entire world. Marriage had been her sanctuary, a love story that began when they were barely more than children, when Andrew had nothing but dreams and determination, when she had stood beside him through every uncertain night, and believed in him when the rest of the world dismissed his ambitions. But something had shifted in recent months, a distance creeping into their home like frost spreading across glass. Andrew came home later and later, his excuses growing more elaborate and less convincing. He no longer reached for her in the darkness, no longer sought her opinion on decisions that once required her input, no longer laughed at her jokes or listened when she spoke about her day. His phone became a third presence in their marriage, buzzing constantly with messages he would not let her see, calls he took in other rooms with the door closed and his voice lowered to whispers. When she touched his shoulder, he flinched. When she asked if something was wrong, he snapped at her with irritation that felt like a stranger wearing her husband's face. The light stayed red, and her gaze drifted across the intersection to the luxury apartment building that rose against the skyline, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering glimpses into other people's lives. That was when she saw him. Andrew, unmistakable even from this distance, standing in a living room that was not theirs, wearing the navy suit she had picked up from the dry cleaner that very morning. Her heart stopped before her mind could process what came next. A woman appeared beside him, young and radiant, wearing a silk robe that barely contained her heavily pregnant belly. Karen's hands tightened on the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, her wedding ring catching the last rays of sunlight. The pregnant woman moved toward Andrew with her hand pressed against her lower back, and he reached out instinctively to steady her, his touch gentle and protective, in a way that Karen recognized because it had once belonged to her. The woman threw her arms around his neck, laughing at something he said, and Andrew's hand moved to cradle her swollen stomach with a tenderness that made Karen's chest constrict until she could not breathe. The light turned green. Cars behind her began honking, their angry blares distant and meaningless. She could not move, could not look away, could not process the magnitude of the betrayal unfolding across the intersection. 6 years of absolute trust, of defending him against friends who whispered concerns about his mother's disapproval of their interracial marriage, of sacrificing her own dreams so he could build his empire. Shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Karen did not remember driving home. She found herself standing in their bedroom with no memory of parking the car or climbing the stairs, staring at the California king bed they had chosen together, at the photos on the dresser documenting their love story. Something cold and hard settled in her chest where her heart used to be, a transformation that happened in an instant, turning grief into steel and betrayal into fuel. She moved through their home with mechanical precision, pulling his clothes from the closet and stuffing them into garbage bags, emptying his drawers, yanking his shoes from their racks, stripping his side of the bed until the sheets lay in a crumpled heap on the floor. By the time Andrew arrived home, whistling as he loosened his tie like this was just another ordinary evening, she had lined the hallway with garbage bags. He froze when he saw her sitting on the couch, surrounded by the physical remains of their marriage, her face a mask of ice he had never seen before. "Karen, what is this?" His voice held confusion and the first edge of panic. "I saw you." Her words came out flat and cold. "At the apartment building on 7th Street. With her. With your pregnant mistress." Andrew's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing without sound, his briefcase slipping from his fingers and hitting the floor with a dull thud. She watched him scramble for excuses, for explanations, and the pathetic desperation in his eyes only hardened her resolve further. "It is not what you think," he finally managed, the oldest lie in the history of betrayal. "Do not." Karen stood, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "Do not insult me further by pretending I did not see exactly what I saw. Do not stand there and lie to my face when I watched you touch her belly, watched you smile at her like she is your entire world. You do not understand the pressure I have been under," Andrew said, his panic transforming into defensive anger. "You do not understand what it is like to have responsibilities and expectations and a legacy to consider." "Legacy?" The word came out like poison. "We were supposed to build that together. We were supposed to be partners in everything. You cannot give me children." The words exploded from him with a cruelty that stole the air from the room. "I found your medical records from years ago. You have a condition that makes pregnancy nearly impossible. I need an heir, Karen. I need someone who can give me a family. What was I supposed to do, just accept that my bloodline ends with me?" The room tilted sideways. Karen grabbed the back of the couch to steady herself, her mind reeling from information she had never known, from a diagnosis she had never received, from a decision he had made about her body and her future without ever telling her the truth. "You knew." Her voice cracked. "You knew about a medical condition I did not even know I had, and instead of telling me, instead of taking me to doctors or fighting for solutions together, you just decided I was defective and went out and found yourself a replacement." "I stayed out of guilt," Andrew said, each word a blade. "I stayed because I felt sorry for you, because I did not want to hurt you. But I cannot sacrifice my future for a marriage that can never give me what I need." Karen looked at the man she had loved with every cell of her being and saw a stranger shaped by entitlement and cowardice. She walked past him toward the door, grabbing only her purse and her car keys. "Karen, wait." Andrew's voice followed her, softer now. "We can talk about this." She turned at the door, meeting his eyes one final time. "I gave you everything, Andrew. My love, my trust, my dreams, my entire life. I stood beside you when you had nothing, believed in you when no one else did, sacrificed every piece of myself so you could become the man you wanted to be. And the moment you decided I was not perfect enough, you threw me away like trash without even having the decency to tell me the truth. I hope she was worth it." She walked out into the night, leaving behind the only home she had known. Behind her, Andrew stood surrounded by garbage bags, finally understanding that some betrayals cannot be undone, and the door closed between them with a finality that echoed through both their futures. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. Karen sat in her car outside a roadside motel, the neon vacancy sign flickering against the windshield like a heartbeat struggling to maintain rhythm. She had driven for hours with no destination, no plan, just the desperate need to put distance between herself and the life that had imploded around her. The modest room she rented smelled of industrial cleaner and other people's disappointments. But it was hers, a space where Andrew's betrayal could not reach her, where she could finally let the numbness crack and feel the full weight of what he had done. She did not cry. The tears would not come, trapped behind a wall of shock that her body had erected for self-preservation. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her wedding ring, that symbol of promises and forever that now felt like a shackle she had worn willingly while he planned her replacement. She twisted it off her finger and held it in her palm, feeling its weight, remembering the day he had slipped it on with tears in his eyes and vows that had sounded so genuine she had never questioned their sincerity. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from Andrew, each one ignored, each voicemail deleted without listening. She had nothing left to say to him, no words that could adequately express the devastation of discovering your entire marriage was a performance, that the person you trusted most had been systematically dismantling your life while you remained blissfully ignorant. Friends texted asking if she was all right, having heard something was wrong, and she powered off the phone rather than explain that her husband had thrown her away like defective merchandise because of a medical condition she did not even know she had. Sleep did not come that first night. Karen lay in the darkness, replaying every moment of their marriage, searching for signs she had missed, clues that might have warned her Andrew was capable of such calculated cruelty. His mother's coldness toward her suddenly made terrible sense. The way Constance Johnson had always looked at Karen like an unwelcome intruder in their family. The constant suggestions that Andrew deserved someone more suitable, more connected, more appropriate for a man of his ambitions. Had Constance known about the affair? Had she encouraged it, perhaps even facilitated it, eager to see her son with someone who fit her narrow definition of acceptable? The thought made Karen's stomach turn. She had endured years of subtle racism disguised as concern, microaggressions wrapped in silk and delivered with a smile, all while Andrew stood silently beside his mother instead of defending his wife. She had told herself it did not matter, that Andrew's love was enough to weather his family's disapproval. But now she understood that his silence had been a preview of his eventual betrayal, a demonstration that he would always choose the path of least resistance over standing up for what was right. Morning arrived with harsh sunlight that hurt her eyes. Karen showered in the tiny bathroom, washing away the scent of the home she had abandoned, scrubbing her skin until it turned pink and raw. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, her eyes hollow and her expression carved from granite. This was what betrayal looked like. What happened when the foundation of your existence crumbled and left you standing in the ruins, wondering who you were without the role you had played for so long. She needed to find a place to live, needed to figure out how to survive without access to the accounts Andrew controlled, needed to start over from absolutely nothing. The reality of her situation began to sink in with crushing weight. She had sacrificed her own career to support Andrew's ambitions, had put her dreams on hold repeatedly while he built his empire, and now she had nothing of her own except a car and whatever money remained in her personal checking account. He had made her dependent, whether intentionally or through thoughtless selfishness, and now that dependency felt like chains she had forged herself. Karen drove to the bank and withdrew every dollar from her account before Andrew could freeze it or claim it somehow belonged to him. The amount was pitifully small, barely enough to survive for a few weeks, but it was hers, and he could not take it from her. She found a studio apartment in a neighborhood far from their previous life, a place with thin walls and questionable plumbing, but a landlord willing to rent to someone with cash and no references. She bought an air mattress and second-hand clothes from a thrift store, each purchase a reminder of how far she had fallen, how completely Andrew had dismantled her life with his betrayal. Her phone remained off for days, a necessary disconnection from everyone who might ask questions she could not bear to answer. But eventually, reality demanded acknowledgement, and when she finally powered it on, the messages flooded in with overwhelming force. Andrew had called dozens of times, his voicemails progressing from angry demands that she return home to pathetic pleas for her to just talk to him. Friends had heard rumors, whispers that something terrible had happened, and they reached out with concern that felt suffocating rather than comforting. One message stood out among the rest. Her college roommate Jasmine, who had moved across the country years ago but maintained sporadic contact, had somehow heard about the separation and left a simple text that cut through the noise with its directness. "Whatever happened, you did not deserve it. Call me when you are ready." "I'm here." Karen stared at those words until they blurred, until the tears finally came in great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the girl who had believed in fairy tales and happily ever after, For the woman who had trusted so completely, she never saw the knife until it was already buried in her back. For the future, she had imagined that would never exist now. She cried until she had nothing left, until her body ached and her throat burned, until the well of grief finally ran dry and left her empty, but somehow lighter. She would survive this. She did not know how yet, did not have a plan or a path forward, but she knew with absolute certainty that she would not let Andrew's betrayal destroy her completely. He had taken her heart and her home and her dreams, but he could not take her will to keep breathing, keep fighting, keep existing in defiance of his cruelty. She would rebuild herself from these ashes, and when she rose again, she would be something he could never touch, never hurt, never diminish with his selfishness and his cowardice. Meanwhile, across the city, in the apartment where Karen had seen her world end, Andrew stood at that same window with his phone pressed to his ear, leaving yet another voicemail that Karen would never hear. Behind him, Felicity Whitmore smiled at her reflection in the mirror, her hand on the prosthetic belly she wore like armor. Already planning her next move in a game Andrew did not even know he was playing. Chapter 3. The Revelation. Karen found work at a small law firm, a receptionist position that paid barely enough to cover her rent and groceries, but required no explanation of the gap in her resume or the references she could not provide. The attorney who hired her, an older woman named Patricia Langford, asked no questions about the hollow look in Karen's eyes or the way her hands trembled when she filled out the employment paperwork. Patricia simply handed her a desk, a list of responsibilities, and a kindness that felt like a lifeline in churning waters. The routine of showing up somewhere each day gave Karen's life structure when everything else felt formless and broken. She answered phones with practiced professionalism, organized files with meticulous attention to detail, and lost herself in the mundane tasks that kept her mind occupied and away from the endless loop of betrayal that threatened to consume her completely. Her co-workers made friendly overtures that she politely deflected, not ready to explain her situation or pretend to be normal when normal felt like a language she no longer spoke. Divorce papers arrived at her apartment via courier, delivered with cold efficiency that matched Andrew's approach to ending their marriage. She read through the legal language that reduced 6 years of love and partnership to property division and asset allocation, saw that he was offering her almost nothing despite the sacrifices she had made for his success, and felt a distant rage that could not quite break through the numbness that had become her constant companion. He wanted a quick dissolution, wanted to erase her from his life as efficiently as he had replaced her, and the sheer audacity of his selfishness would have been breathtaking if she still had breath left too. She signed the papers without contest, without demanding what she deserved, because fighting him would require energy she did not possess, and engagement she refused to give. Let him keep his money and his things, and his empire built on lies. She wanted nothing that carried his fingerprints, nothing that would tie her to him for longer than absolutely necessary. Her signature felt like the final act of their tragedy, the moment when she officially released him from obligations he had already abandoned and freed herself from the illusion that their marriage had ever been what she believed. Patricia found her crying in the bathroom one afternoon, ugly sobs she could not quite muffle behind the stall door. Instead of pretending not to notice or offering empty platitudes, Patricia simply waited until Karen emerged, and then took her to lunch at a quiet cafe where they could talk without the office listening. Karen found herself spilling the entire story, every humiliating detail of discovering Andrew's affair, the medical condition he had kept secret, the cruelty of his words, and the devastation of realizing she never really knew him at all. "My ex-husband did something similar," Patricia said, when Karen finally ran out of words. "Different details, but the same essential betrayal. Left me for his secretary, the most cliché thing imaginable, and acted like I was unreasonable for being upset. That was decades ago, and I survived it. You will too, even though right now that probably sounds impossible. How did you do it?" Karen asked, desperate for some blueprint, some evidence that life could exist on the other side of this devastation. "One day at a time," Patricia said simply. "One breath, one step, one moment of not giving up even when giving up felt like the only option. And eventually those moments added up to something that looked like a life again. Not the life I planned, but a life nonetheless. One that belonged entirely to me." Those words stayed with Karen long after lunch ended, and they returned to work. She began to see her situation not as the end of everything, but as a brutal kind of freedom, a chance to build something that had nothing to do with Andrew or his ambitions or his mother's racist expectations. She was unmoored and adrift, but she was also unchained from a man who saw her as disposable, and a marriage that had been slowly suffocating her long before she recognized the symptoms. She started taking evening classes in things that interested her, subjects she had abandoned when Andrew's needs took priority over her own curiosities. She read books she had been meaning to explore for years, watched movies Andrew had dismissed as pointless, ate foods he claimed to dislike, and slowly began to remember who she had been before marriage reshaped her into someone designed to complement his life rather than live her own. Each small act of independence felt like rebellion, like reclaiming territory Andrew had colonized without her realizing she was being occupied. One afternoon, while organizing files in Patricia's office, Karen stumbled across documents that made her blood run cold. The law firm occasionally handled corporate matters, and mixed in with routine paperwork was a folder containing information about a shell company involved in hostile acquisitions and corporate espionage. The name on several documents was familiar in a way that made her stomach drop. Harold Brennan, a name she had heard Andrew mention as his biggest competitor. His primary business rival, the person he claimed was always trying to steal his innovations and undermine his success. Karen's hands shook as she read deeper into the file, seeing patterns and connections that should not exist. Felicity Whitmore's name appeared on bank transfers, her signature on non-disclosure agreements, her employment listed as consultant for one of Brennan's subsidiaries. The dates aligned perfectly with when Andrew had started acting strange, when his behavior had shifted and his late nights had become routine. This was not a simple affair born from passion or wandering desire. This was calculated, strategic, designed to destroy Andrew from the inside while he remained blind to the weapon being used against him. Karen should have felt vindicated, should have experienced some satisfaction at discovering Andrew was being betrayed, just as he had betrayed her. But instead, she felt only a hollow ache for the waste of it all. He'd thrown away their marriage, chasing a woman who saw him as nothing more than a target, had believed lies designed specifically to manipulate his weaknesses and exploit his ego. Part of her wanted to warn him, wanted to prevent the devastation she could see coming like a storm on the horizon. But a larger part, the part still bleeding from his cruelty, stayed silent and watched the trap close around him with the cold detachment of someone who had learned that some people only understand pain when they finally experience it themselves. She carefully photographed the documents with her phone before returning them to their proper place. Evidence of a conspiracy she would not report, but wanted preserved nonetheless. Whatever happened next to Andrew was his own doing, the natural consequence of valuing the wrong things and hurting the people who actually loved him. She had tried to save him once by being the perfect wife, the supportive partner, the woman who sacrificed everything for his dreams. That version of herself had died the moment she saw him touch another woman's pregnant belly, and she would not resurrect it now, not even to spare him from his own stupidity and greed. Patricia found her staring out the office window as evening fell, her expression unreadable, and asked if everything was all right. Karen turned to her with a smile that contained no warmth, no softness, only the hard edges of someone who had survived one betrayal and was watching another unfold with the grim fascination of recognizing patterns she once missed. Everything is perfectly fine, Karen said, and meant it in ways Patricia could never fully understand. Chapter 4. The Architect. Karen walked through her tiny apartment as dawn broke over the city. Unable to sleep, her mind circling endlessly around the documents she had discovered. The knowledge of Felicity's deception sat heavy in her chest, not with the weight of responsibility, but with the strange burden of witnessing karma in action. She made coffee in the small kitchenette, watching steam rise from the cup like ghosts of the life she used to have, and tried to reconcile the woman she had been with the woman she was becoming. Her phone rang, shattering the morning silence. Jasmine's name appeared on the screen, and Karen answered with the weariness of someone who had not slept properly in weeks. "You sound terrible," Jasmine said without preamble, her voice carrying the familiar directness that had defined their friendship since college. "Talk to me. Tell me everything." So Karen did. She told Jasmine about the traffic light in the window and the pregnant belly, about Andrew's cruel confession regarding her supposed infertility, about the divorce papers and the tiny apartment and the job that barely kept her afloat. She told her about discovering Felicity's connection to Harold Brennan, about the conspiracy unfolding in documents she had accidentally uncovered, about the choice she had made to let Andrew face the consequences of his own blindness. "Good," Jasmine said fiercely when Karen finished. "Let him burn. Let him feel what it is like to be betrayed by someone he trusted, to have his world ripped apart by lies and manipulation. You do not owe him anything, Karen. Not your forgiveness, not your help, not your concern. He made his choices. Now he gets to live with them." "I know that," Karen said quietly. "But it still feels strange, watching it happen and doing nothing to stop it." "That is not doing nothing," Jasmine corrected. "That is refusing to rescue someone who pushed you off a cliff. That is self-preservation. That is finally putting yourself first instead of sacrificing yourself for a man who never appreciated what he had." They talked for over an hour, Jasmine's anger on Karen's behalf a balm to wounds that still bled despite her attempts to cauterize them with distance and numbness. When they finally hung up, Karen felt marginally more stable, less like she was drowning and more like she was treading water, still fighting to stay afloat, but no longer actively sinking. She went to work and moved through her day with mechanical efficiency, answering calls and filing papers and maintaining the professional demeanor that kept people from asking too many questions. But her mind remained elsewhere, imagining the moment when Andrew would discover Felicity's betrayal, when his world would implode the way hers had, when he would finally understand the particular agony of realizing someone you loved never actually existed. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Andrew's number appeared on her phone, and Karen stared at it for several rings before answering, curiosity overriding her instinct to ignore him completely. "Karen." His voice sounded destroyed, hoarse and broken, nothing like the confident man who had thrown her away. "Karen, please. I need to talk to you. I need to tell you something." "I have nothing to say to you, Andrew," she said, her tone flat and uninterested. "Sign the divorce papers. Leave me alone. Move on with your life." "She was not pregnant," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Felicity was never pregnant. It was all fake, all a lie. She was working for Harold Brennan, stealing from me, destroying everything I built. Karen, I lost everything. The company, the money, everything is gone." Karen closed her eyes and saw the documents in her mind, the proof of conspiracy she had discovered weeks ago, the evidence that could have saved him if she had chosen to share it. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a distant sadness for how completely they had both been destroyed by his choices. "I am sorry that happened to you," she said, and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with wanting to help him. "But it has nothing to do with me anymore. You ended our marriage, Andrew. You threw me away. What happens to you now is not my responsibility. I know I hurt you," Andrew said desperately. "I know I said terrible things and made horrible choices. But Karen, please, you have to understand. My mother convinced me that you were trying to trap me, that your family was beneath our standards, that I needed someone who could give me a proper heir. She poisoned me against you, and I was too weak to fight her, too cowardly to defend you. I am sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. Your mother did not force you to cheat, Karen said coldly. Your mother did not make you find my medical records and decide I was defective without ever talking to me about it. Your mother did not put those cruel words in your mouth when you told me you stayed with me out of pity. Those were your choices, Andrew. Own them. I know, he whispered. You are right. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was stupid and selfish and believed the wrong people. I would do anything to take it back, Karen, anything to fix what I broke. Some things cannot be fixed, Karen said, her voice gentle now, almost kind in its finality. You made your choices. I am making mine. Goodbye, Andrew. She hung up before he could respond, before his pain could reach through the phone and make her feel responsible for his suffering. She sat at her desk, with her hands trembling slightly, feeling something shift inside her, some final piece of their marriage falling away and leaving behind empty space where rage and grief had been. She did not forgive him. She probably never would. But she no longer needed his destruction to heal her wounds, no longer required his suffering to balance her pain. Patricia appeared beside her desk with a knowing look, having overheard enough of the conversation to understand its significance. That sounded difficult, she said carefully. It was necessary, Karen replied, meeting Patricia's eyes with newfound clarity. I needed to hear him broken, to finally let go of the fantasy that he might have actually loved me once. Now I know the truth. He loved himself. I was just convenient until I was not. What will you do now? Patricia asked. Karen looked around the small office, at the life she had cobbled together from the ruins of her marriage, at the future stretching before her, blank and uncertain, but finally hers to shape however she chose. Everything, Karen said and smiled for the first time in weeks. I'm going to do absolutely everything I never got to do while I was busy being his wife. Outside, rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, and Karen felt something like hope stirring in her chest where her heart used to be, fragile and tentative, but undeniably alive. Chapter 5. The Foundation. Karen stood in the community college classroom, her notebook open, her attention fixed on the instructor explaining principles she had abandoned years ago when Andrew's ambitions became her entire world. Returning to education felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. She had thought lost, interests and passions sacrificed so completely she had almost forgotten they existed. The other students were younger, fresher, unbruised by the kind of betrayal that aged you from the inside, but their energy was infectious, reminding her that life contained possibilities beyond the narrow corridor she had been walking for too long. She excelled in her classes with an intensity that surprised her instructors, pouring all her rage and grief and determination into assignments and projects that gave her somewhere to direct the chaos inside her. Each high grade felt like proof that she was more than the woman Andrew had discarded, more than the wife who had been deemed insufficient and replaced. She was intelligent, capable, valuable on her own merits, rather than as an accessory to someone else's achievements. Patricia noticed the change in her, the way Karen carried herself with increasing confidence, the way her eyes no longer held that hollow devastation that had been so pronounced in those first terrible weeks. One afternoon, Patricia called her into the office and made an offer that would alter everything. I have been watching you, Patricia said, leaning back in her leather chair with a thoughtful expression. You are wasted as a receptionist, Karen. You have a brilliant mind that should be put to better use. I want to train you as a paralegal, teach you the aspects of law that most schools never cover, give you real experience that will serve you regardless of where you go from here. Karen stared at her, unable to process the gift being offered, the kindness from someone who owed her nothing and gained little from investing in her future. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly around the words. "Because someone did it for me once," Patricia said simply. "When my ex-husband left me with nothing, and I was working 3 jobs just to keep my children. Fed, a senior partner at a firm, took a chance on me, despite my lack of credentials and broken confidence. She saw potential where everyone else saw desperation. I never forgot that gift, and I have spent my career trying to pay it forward. Let me help you, Karen. Let me show you what you are capable of when someone actually invests in your success." Tears streamed down Karen's face before she could stop them, tears of gratitude and relief, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. She had been so accustomed to being diminished, to having her dreams dismissed as secondary to more important concerns, that genuine support felt almost incomprehensible. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the magnitude of what Patricia was offering. "I will not let you down, I promise." "I know you will not," Patricia said with absolute certainty. "Now stop crying and get back to work. You have a lot to learn, and I do not accept anything less than excellence from my people." Karen threw herself into her new role with ferocious dedication, studying late into the night, absorbing information like someone dying of thirst, finally given water. She learned the intricacies of contracts and negotiations, the strategies lawyers employed to protect their clients, the ways legal systems could be navigated to achieve justice, or at least something approximating fairness. Patricia was a demanding teacher, accepting no excuses and tolerating no mediocrity, pushing Karen harder than anyone ever had before. But unlike Andrew's criticism that had always felt like diminishment disguised as improvement, Patricia's high standards came from genuine belief in Karen's capabilities. She also made a decision that had been brewing since discovering her supposed infertility was based on outdated information. She scheduled an appointment with a fertility specialist, determined to get accurate answers about her body and her options, refusing to let Andrew's careless cruelty define her future. The doctor reviewed her old medical records, ran new tests, and delivered news that made Karen's entire world shift on its axis. "There is no reason you cannot have children," the doctor said, her expression warm and reassuring. "Your old diagnosis was preliminary and should have been followed up with additional testing that apparently never happened. With proper monitoring and perhaps some minor interventions, pregnancy is absolutely possible for you. Whoever told you otherwise was either misinformed or working from incomplete data." Karen left that appointment feeling vindicated and enraged in equal measure. Andrew had destroyed their marriage over a medical condition that never actually existed, had replaced her based on false information he never bothered to verify, had deemed her defective without giving her any opportunity to seek proper treatment or second opinions. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, the casual way he had made permanent decisions about her body and her future without her knowledge or consent. But beneath the anger was something else, something powerful and transformative. She could have children if she chose, could build the family she had always imagined, could give that gift to herself instead of remaining forever defined by what Andrew had taken from her. The future suddenly contained possibilities she had mourned as impossible, and that knowledge changed everything. Jasmine visited one weekend, flying across the country to check on her friend and assess the progress Karen claimed in their phone conversations. She found Karen in a different apartment, slightly larger and significantly nicer than the first desperate place she had fled to, decorated with touches of personality that spoke of someone rebuilding rather than merely surviving. "You look good," Jasmine said, genuine surprise in her voice. "Tired, but good, like you are actually living instead of just going through the motions." I am, Karen admitted, pouring wine for both of them. It still hurts, and I still have days where I want to scream at the unfairness of everything. But I am building something that belongs to me. Patricia is teaching me so much, and I am finally pursuing interests I abandoned, and I found out I can have children if I want them someday. Andrew was wrong about everything then, Jasmine said with satisfaction. He threw away a diamond because his racist mother convinced him you were not good enough, and now he is broken alone while you are thriving. I call that justice. It does not feel like justice, Karen said thoughtfully. It just feels like waste. We could have had something beautiful if he had been brave enough to fight for it, if he had valued me over his mother's approval and his obsession with legacy. But he was not, and we did not, and now here we are. I'm not glad he's suffering, but I am glad I'm not suffering with him anymore. They spent the weekend together, laughing in ways Karen had not laughed in months, sharing memories of who they had been before life got complicated and painful. Jasmine's presence reminded Karen that she had an identity beyond wife, beyond betrayed woman, beyond survivor. She was still herself underneath all the trauma, still capable of joy and friendship and ridiculous humor that had nothing to do with Andrew or his destruction. When Jasmine left, Karen stood at the window of her apartment, watching the city lights flicker like possibilities waiting to be seized. She thought about the woman she had been at that traffic light, naive and trusting, and about to have her world shattered. She thought about the woman she was now, harder and wiser and infinitely stronger for having survived her own destruction. She thought about the woman she was becoming, undefined by anyone's expectations or limitations, free to pursue whatever future she could imagine and build with her own hands. Her phone buzzed with a message from Patricia reminding her about an early meeting, and Karen smiled at the screen with genuine warmth. She had a purpose now, a path forward that belonged entirely to her, and nothing Andrew had done could take that away because she had built it from the ashes of what he destroyed. She was rising slowly but surely, and when she finally stood at her full height, she would be magnificent in ways he never imagined possible, because he never actually saw her at all. Chapter 6. The Emergence. Karen attended the legal conference with Patricia, her first professional event in her new role, and felt profoundly out of place among the expensive suits and confident networking. She had never been comfortable in these environments, even when she attended as Andrew's wife, always feeling like an intruder in spaces designed for people who looked and spoke and moved differently than she did. But Patricia had insisted she needed the exposure, needed to see how connections were made and opportunities created. And Karen trusted her mentor enough to push through the discomfort. The keynote speaker was discussing ethical considerations in representing difficult clients, and Karen found herself absorbed by the presentation, by the complexity of balancing legal obligations with moral concerns. She took notes compulsively, her mind racing with questions and connections, so focused on the content that she barely registered the crowd around her or the hum of conversation that filled the conference hall during breaks. Patricia introduced her to several colleagues, attorneys with decades of experience who treated Karen with courtesy but clear skepticism, their eyes assessing her worth and finding it wanting. She had grown accustomed to this reception, the dismissive glances and patronizing tones that suggested she did not belong in their world. But it still stung in ways she refused to acknowledge publicly. She smiled professionally, asked intelligent questions, and let her competence speak louder than their prejudgments. During a panel discussion on corporate law, Karen noticed a man sitting several rows ahead, his posture familiar in a way that made her stomach clench. She told herself she was imagining things, that her traumatized mind was seeing ghosts where none existed. But when he turned his head slightly, she recognized Andrew's profile with devastating certainty. He looked different somehow, diminished and weathered, the arrogance that had always characterized him replaced by something quieter and sadder. Her first instinct was to flee, to escape before he noticed her presence, and shattered the equilibrium she had fought so hard to establish. But something kept her rooted in place, some stubborn refusal to run from him again, to let his mere existence drive her away from spaces she had every right to occupy. She had done nothing wrong, had committed no crime except trusting the wrong person, and she would not surrender her hard-won confidence because her ex-husband happened to be in the same room. Andrew did not see her during the panel, his attention fixed on the speakers with an intensity that suggested desperate hope that knowledge might save him from whatever circumstances he currently faced. Karen watched him from a distance, this man she had loved so completely, and felt nothing except a distant curiosity about how thoroughly life had humbled him. His expensive suit was several years old, his shoes worn at the heels, his entire presentation suggesting someone who had fallen far and was struggling to climb back up. The conference broke for lunch, and Karen followed Patricia toward the dining area, deliberately avoiding the direction Andrew had gone. But fate or coincidence or simple bad luck brought them face to face in the hallway, and his eyes met hers with a shock that rippled visibly through his entire body. He froze, his mouth opening but no words emerging, his face cycling through surprise and guilt and something that looked painfully like longing. Karen kept walking, her expression neutral, treating him with the same polite indifference she would show any stranger. She saw him flinch at her coldness, saw pain flash across his features, and felt absolutely nothing in response. He was a person she used to know, someone who had once meant everything, but that connection had been severed so completely that even his suffering could not reach her anymore. Patricia noticed the interaction and raised an eyebrow questioningly once they were seated, at a table far from where Andrew had gone. "Ex-husband?" she asked quietly, her tone carefully neutral. "Former stranger," Karen corrected. "Someone I thought I knew, who turned out to be entirely fictional." They ate lunch, while Patricia shared stories about her own divorce, the years of rebuilding, and the eventual discovery that life after betrayal could be richer than life during the comfortable lie. Karen listened with the attention of someone seeking a roadmap, desperate for evidence that the path she was walking led somewhere worth the journey. Andrew appeared at their table as they were finishing dessert, his approach hesitant and apologetic, his entire demeanor radiating the kind of desperate humility that comes from having nothing left to lose. "Karen," he said softly, "could I please speak with you for just a moment? I will not take much of your time." Patricia looked at Karen with a question in her eyes, ready to dismiss Andrew if her protégé gave any indication of discomfort. But Karen surprised herself by nodding, by standing and following Andrew to a quiet corner of the lobby where they could talk without an audience. "You look incredible," Andrew said, his voice thick with emotion. "Successful and confident and everything you deserve to become. I'm glad you're doing well. What do you want, Andrew?" Karen asked, her tone businesslike and impatient. "I am here for professional development, not a reunion with my past." "I know," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know that I have spent every day since you left regretting what I did, understanding how completely I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm not asking for forgiveness or another chance. I know I do not deserve either. I just needed to tell you that you were right about everything, and I am sorry for every moment of pain I caused you." Karen studied his face, seeing genuine remorse where arrogance used to live, witnessing what appeared to be authentic transformation in someone she had written off as irredeemable. It would have been easier if he remained the villain, if he had learned nothing and stayed exactly the person who had thrown her away. His growth complicated her narrative, forced her to acknowledge that people could change, even if that change came too late to matter. "I appreciate your apology," she said carefully, "but it does not change anything between us, Andrew. What you did destroyed something that cannot be rebuilt. I have moved on with my life, and you need to do the same." "I know," he said again, nodding slowly. "I will leave you alone." I just wanted you to hear that I understand now what I was too blind to see then. You were everything, Karen. You were the whole world. And I traded you for ashes." He walked away before she could respond, his shoulders slumped with defeat. And Karen returned to Patricia with emotions churning inside her that she could not quite identify or name. She should have felt triumphant, should have savored his obvious suffering as evidence that justice existed after all. But instead, she just felt tired and sad about the profound waste of something that could have been beautiful if he had been brave enough to nurture it instead of destroying it. Patricia did not ask what Andrew had said, respecting Karen's privacy enough to wait until she was ready to share. They finished the conference together, attending sessions and networking events, building connections that would serve Karen's emerging career. When they finally left, Karen felt stronger somehow, like seeing Andrew had closed some chapter she did not know was still open. That night, alone in her apartment, Karen looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She had been transformed by betrayal and survival, shaped by pain into something harder and more resilient than she ever imagined possible. Andrew's apology had given her nothing she needed, changed nothing about their history, but it had confirmed something important. She had not been crazy or oversensitive or wrong to leave. He had been exactly as terrible as she believed, and his belated understanding could not undo the damage he had inflicted. She went to bed thinking not about Andrew, but about her future, about the career she was building, and the possibilities stretching before her like an open road with no destination except wherever she chose to go. She was free in ways she had never been during their marriage, liberated by his betrayal to finally become whoever she wanted without compromise or sacrifice. It was a bitter kind of gift, but it was hers, and she would not waste it dwelling on someone who had already taken too much of her life. Chapter 7. The Distance. Karen threw herself into work with an intensity that concerned even Patricia, staying late every night, arriving early every morning, filling every moment with tasks and learning and forward motion that kept her from thinking too deeply about the conference and Andrew's presence. She told herself the encounter had not affected her, that seeing him broken and apologetic meant nothing, that she remained completely indifferent to his fate. But her dreams betrayed her, replaying moments from their marriage when love had felt real and eternal, forcing her to wake in darkness with tears on her face and his name on her lips. She dated occasionally, accepting invitations from men who seemed kind and appropriate, going through the motions of connection without actually letting anyone close enough to matter. Each dinner and movie and goodnight kiss felt performative, like she was playing the role of someone open to romance, while keeping her actual self locked away where no one could reach her. The men eventually drifted away, sensing her unavailability, and she felt relief rather than disappointment at their departure. Jasmine called one evening, her voice carrying concern that transcended distance. "You sound strange," she said without preamble, "different from when I visited." "Talk to me, Karen. What happened?" So Karen told her about seeing Andrew at the conference, about his apology and his obvious suffering, about the unwelcome realization that his transformation felt genuine, even though it came far too late to repair what he had shattered. "You still love him," Jasmine said flatly, her tone hovering between accusation and sympathy. "No," Karen said immediately, the denial automatic and fierce. "I do not love him. I hate him for what he did. I hate him for destroying something beautiful. I hate him for making me question my own worth. I do not love him." "You hate him because you still love him," Jasmine corrected gently. "If you felt nothing, you would not need to hate him so intensely. You would just be indifferent. But you are not indifferent, Karen. You are still so angry because part of you is still grieving what you lost." Karen wanted to argue, wanted to insist that Jasmine was wrong, but the words stuck in her throat because deep down she recognized the truth in them. She had built walls around her heart to keep Andrew out, but those walls only existed because the wound he created still bled beneath the surface. Indifference would not require such elaborate defenses. What am I supposed to do with that? Karen asked quietly, her voice breaking around the question. He destroyed me, Jasmine. He threw me away like I was nothing. How am I supposed to just forgive that and move on? I'm not saying you should forgive him, Jasmine replied. I am saying you should stop pretending you do not still have feelings about what happened. You are allowed to be angry and hurt and grieving all at once. You are allowed to acknowledge that you loved him and lost him, and that loss still hurts even though he does not deserve your continued pain. Feeling things does not make you weak, Karen. It makes you human. They talked late into the night, Jasmine's patience infinite, Karen's defenses slowly crumbling under the weight of honesty. By the time they hung up, Karen felt raw and exposed, but also strangely lighter, like admitting her complicated feelings somehow robbed them of their power to torture her. She began seeing a therapist, a quiet woman named Dr. Ellis, who asked difficult questions and refused to accept surface answers. Together, they excavated the layers of trauma from her marriage, from Andrew's betrayal, from the way his cruelty had warped her sense of self-worth and her capacity to trust. The sessions were exhausting and often painful, forcing Karen to confront emotions she had been determinedly avoiding. But they also gave her tools to process the devastation without letting it define her forever. You keep talking about Andrew as if his betrayal says something essential about you, Dr. Ellis observed during one session. But his choices reveal his character, not yours. His inability to value what he had. His willingness to believe his mother's poison over his own experience of loving you. His cowardice in the face of her racism, those are statements about who he is, not who you are. But he looked at me and found me insufficient, Karen said, the core wound finally exposed. He decided I was not good enough, not valuable enough, not worth fighting for. He decided wrong, Dr. Ellis replied simply. And you have spent years proving exactly how wrong he was. Look at everything you have built from the ashes of your marriage. Look at the career you are creating, the strength you have developed, the life you are living on your own terms. You are not insufficient, Karen. You are extraordinary. And his failure to recognize that tells us nothing about your worth and everything about his blindness. Those words settled into Karen's bones, slowly displacing the narrative Andrew had written about her inadequacy. She began to see herself through eyes unclouded by his judgment, recognizing her own intelligence and resilience and capacity for survival. She was not the broken woman he had discarded. She was the phoenix who had risen from those ashes and built something magnificent from her own determination. Patricia offered her a permanent position at the firm, a role with real responsibility and genuine respect. Acknowledging the progress Karen had made and the potential she continued to demonstrate. The salary still was not lavish, but it was enough to live comfortably, to pursue her interests, to build a life that felt sustainable and authentic. Karen celebrated by moving to a better apartment, a place with actual sunlight and space to breathe, somewhere that felt like home rather than temporary shelter. She decorated according to her own taste, buying furniture and art that pleased her without considering anyone else's opinion, creating an environment that reflected who she was becoming rather than who she had been forced to be. She ran into Andrew one more time, months after the conference, in a coffee shop near Patricia's office. He sat alone in the corner with a laptop and a look of intense concentration, clearly working on something that demanded his full attention. Karen almost left without speaking, almost preserved the distance between them, but something made her walk over to his table instead. "Hello, Andrew," she said, her voice neutral but not unkind. He looked up, surprise and wariness flashing across his features, clearly expecting her to unleash some righteous anger at his presence in her neighborhood. "Karen," he said cautiously, "I did not know you worked around here. I can leave if my being here bothers you." "It does not," she said, surprising both of them with the truth of it. "I just wanted to tell you that I heard you were helping people who needed support, using what influence you have left to open doors for others. That is good work, Andrew. I'm glad you found a way to make something positive from everything that happened." He stared at her like she had spoken in a foreign language, his eyes filling with tears he clearly was not expecting. "Thank you," he whispered. "That means more than you could possibly know." "I have to go," Karen said, already regretting her impulse to speak. "Take care of yourself." She walked away before he could respond, before the conversation could become something more complicated than the simple acknowledgement she had offered. But as she left the coffee shop and returned to her life, she felt something shift inside her, some final piece of bitterness releasing its grip on her heart. She did not forgive him. She probably never would. But she no longer needed his suffering to validate her own healing, no longer required his destruction to feel whole. She was whole already, she realized, scarred and changed, and fundamentally different from the woman she had been, but whole nonetheless. And that wholeness had nothing to do with Andrew or his apologies or his attempts at redemption. It belonged entirely to her, built from her own strength and determination and refusal to let his betrayal define the limits of her existence. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Karen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Patricia's office, watching the city sprawl below like a living organism, all movement and light and endless possibility. Her mentor had called her in for what was described as an important discussion, and Karen felt anticipation mixed with apprehension as she waited for Patricia to finish a phone call. In the years since her marriage had imploded, she had rebuilt herself so completely that sometimes she barely recognized the woman who had once defined herself entirely through her relationship with Andrew. Patricia hung up and gestured for Karen to sit, her expression unreadable but intense. "I am retiring," Patricia announced without preamble. "Not immediately, but within the year, and I want you to take over my practice." Karen felt the world tilt sideways, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what was being offered. "Patricia, I cannot possibly. I'm not even a full attorney yet. I'm still learning, still so far from being ready to run an entire practice." "You are more ready than you realize," Patricia said firmly. "You have excellent instincts, strong ethics, and a work ethic that puts people twice your age to shame. More importantly, you understand what it means to fight from a position of disadvantage, to overcome obstacles that would break someone less resilient. That understanding makes you a better advocate than most lawyers will ever be, regardless of their credentials." "But what about the other paralegals? What about people who have been here longer, who have more experience?" "None of them have what you have," Patricia replied. "None of them possess your particular combination of intelligence and empathy and absolute refusal to accept defeat. I built this practice to help people who needed an advocate, Karen. I want to leave it in hands that will honor that mission. Your hands." Tears blurred Karen's vision before she could stop them, gratitude and disbelief warring inside her chest. She thought about the woman who had fled her marriage with nothing, who had slept in roadside motels and survived on hope and stubbornness alone. That woman could never have imagined this moment, this validation, this future being handed to her by someone who believed in her potential. "I do not know what to say," she managed finally, her voice thick with emotion. "Say yes," Patricia suggested with a rare smile. "Say you will finish your legal education and take over this practice and continue helping people who need someone in their corner. Say you will not waste the gifts you have been given by playing small to make others comfortable." "Yes," Karen said, the word feeling like a vow, like a promise to herself as much as to Patricia. "Yes, I will do it. I will make you proud." "You already have," Patricia said simply, reaching across the desk to squeeze Karen's hand. "Every single day you make me proud. The way you survived what Andrew did to you, the way you refused to let that devastation define your limits, the way you turned pain into purpose. You are exactly the kind of person this world needs more of. Karen left the office feeling like she was floating, her heart so full it threatened to burst from her chest. She walked through the streets without destination, letting her feet carry her, while her mind spun with possibilities and plans and the overwhelming gratitude of being seen, truly seen for who she was rather than who someone else needed her to be. That evening, Karen sat in her apartment with a glass of wine and a heart that ached with fullness rather than emptiness. She thought about calling Jasmine to share the news, about posting something on social media to celebrate this milestone. But instead, she sat in quiet appreciation of how far she had traveled from that traffic light where her world had shattered. Every step had been agony, every breath a battle. But she had kept moving forward, even when forward felt impossible. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, and she almost deleted it without reading until curiosity got the better of her. The words on the screen made her breath catch, made her newly healed heart stutter with unwelcome recognition. I know you told me to move on with my life, and I have tried. But I need you to know that seeing you thriving, seeing you become everything you were always meant to be, brings me more peace than I deserve. I am proud of you, Karen, even though I have no right to those feelings. You were always extraordinary. I was just too blind to appreciate it until I had already destroyed us. I will not contact you again. I just needed you to know that you were never the problem. You were always the solution. I was just too broken to hold on to you properly. The world is better because you survived what I did to you. I hope you know that. The message was signed with Andrew's name, and Karen stared at it for a long time, feeling things she could not quite identify or categorize. His words sounded genuine, carried the weight of hard-won understanding, acknowledged truths he had been too arrogant to see when they mattered. But they also changed nothing, fixed nothing, repaired nothing that had been shattered between them. He wanted absolution or closure, or some acknowledgement that his transformation mattered to her, but she had nothing left to give him. She thought about responding, about telling him she had just been offered Patricia's practice, about sharing her triumph with the one person who knew what she had come from and how far she had traveled. But that impulse died as quickly as it arose, because Andrew no longer deserved access to her victories or her joy. He had forfeited that privilege when he threw her away, and his belated understanding did not restore what he had voluntarily surrendered. Karen deleted the message without responding, refusing to engage with his continued presence in her life, even at this distant remove. She would not give him the satisfaction of knowing his words had moved her, had made her pause and remember and feel things she preferred to keep buried. Her energy was for herself now, for building the future Patricia was helping her create, for becoming the person she had always possessed the potential to be if given the right support and opportunities. She poured herself another glass of wine and raised it to her reflection in the window, toasting the woman she had become and the woman she was still becoming. Patricia's faith in her had planted seeds that were finally blooming into something remarkable, something that bore no resemblance to the life she had lost. This was better, she realized with sudden clarity. This life she was building from her own determination and grit was infinitely more valuable than the comfortable existence she had shared with Andrew, where her worth was tied to his success and her dreams were always secondary to his ambitions. Weeks passed in a blur of studying and working and preparing for bar examinations. Karen pushed herself harder than ever, determined to prove Patricia's faith in her was not misplaced, desperate to honor the gift she had been given by someone who believed in her when she barely believed in herself. The other paralegals at the firm reacted to her promotion with varying degrees of resentment and skepticism, whispers suggesting she had only succeeded because Patricia felt sorry for her. Because she was being given opportunities, others deserved more. Karen ignored the gossip with practiced ease, refusing to let their jealousy diminish her accomplishment. or make her question whether she deserved what she had earned through years of relentless work and sacrifice. She knew her own worth now, understood that her value did not require external validation or universal approval. She was good at what she did, brilliant even. And anyone who could not see that was revealing their own limitations rather than exposing hers. She had learned this lesson the hardest way possible, through Andrew's rejection and the long climb back to self-respect. His cruelty had taught her that other people's inability to value you said nothing about your actual worth and everything about their capacity for recognition. She carried that knowledge like armor now, protection against the casual dismissals and microaggressions that once would have wounded her deeply. A charity gala invitation arrived, an event supporting women escaping domestic violence and financial abuse. Patricia encouraged her to attend, insisting that networking at such events was essential for someone preparing to take over a practice. Karen almost declined, her natural introversion recoiling from the forced sociability of such gatherings, but something made her accept. Perhaps it was the cause itself, so closely aligned with her own experience of rebuilding after devastation. Perhaps it was the recognition that hiding from opportunities because they made her uncomfortable was no longer acceptable. Perhaps she just needed to prove to herself that she could occupy spaces that once intimidated her without dissolving into anxiety. She bought a dress for the occasion, something elegant and powerful, an outfit that announced her presence rather than apologizing for it. The deep emerald fabric complemented her skin in ways that made her feel beautiful and fierce, like a warrior dressed for battle rather than a woman trying to blend into wallpaper. When she looked at herself in the mirror the night of the gala, she saw a woman who had survived hell and emerged magnificent, scarred but unbroken, transformed by pain into something diamond-hard and unshakable. Andrew would not recognize her now, she realized with satisfaction. The woman he had discarded no longer existed, replaced by this fierce and resilient version that bore only superficial resemblance to her former self. She had shed that old skin completely, molted into something new and infinitely stronger. And the transformation was so complete that even she sometimes struggled to remember who she had been before betrayal reshaped her. The gala was crowded with exactly the kind of people Karen had learned to navigate during her years with Andrew, wealthy and well-connected and utterly convinced of their own importance. But she moved through the crowd with confidence now, her education and experience giving her conversational currency, her genuine passion for the cause, making her contributions to discussions authentic rather than performative. She spoke with survivors about their journeys, listened to their stories with the understanding of someone who had walked similar paths and felt something like purpose settling into her bones. She was standing near the silent auction tables, examining donated items and considering bids when she sensed him before she saw him. That familiar presence that her body recognized even when her mind insisted on indifference. Andrew stood across the room, talking with event organizers, looking uncomfortable in his formal wear, clearly present out of obligation or genuine interest rather than social climbing. He wore a suit that had seen better days, his entire presentation suggesting someone who was attending because he believed in the cause rather than because he wanted to be seen. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and for a moment everything else faded away, the noise and the people, and the intervening years all vanishing until it was just the two of them staring at each other, with a history too complicated to ever fully unravel. Karen felt her pulse quicken despite her best efforts at indifference, her carefully constructed equilibrium suddenly precarious. She could read the surprise in his expression, the pain and longing that he tried unsuccessfully to mask, the way his entire body seemed to lean toward her before he caught himself and remained rooted in place. Karen turned away first, refusing to let his presence derail her evening or make her question her own equilibrium. She had worked too hard to reach this point, had suffered too much to arrive at this place of peace and purpose, to let his unexpected appearance shatter what she had built. But she felt him throughout the rest of the gala, always at the periphery of her awareness, a ghost from her past haunting the edges of her present. She gave a brief speech about the Foundation's work, her voice steady and powerful as she spoke about surviving financial abuse and rebuilding from nothing. She did not mention Andrew by name, but anyone who knew their story would recognize the echoes of her experience in her words. She spoke about the importance of supporting women as they reclaimed their lives, about the transformative power of believing in someone's potential even when they had been broken by betrayal. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, and Karen felt tears threatening despite her determination to remain composed. Patricia stood in the front row with pride written across her face, and Karen focused on her mentor rather than scanning the crowd for Andrew's reaction. She would not give him that power, would not let his presence influence how she felt about her own accomplishment. When she finally escaped to the balcony for air, she should have known he would follow, should have anticipated that the unfinished business between them demanded resolution they had both been avoiding. The door opened behind her, and she did not need to turn around to know who stood there. His presence as familiar as her own heartbeat, despite the years and distance between them. Chapter 9. The Collision. The night air hit Karen's face like a blessing, cool and clean after the stifling atmosphere inside. She gripped the balcony railing and stared out at the city lights, trying to calm the racing of her heart that had nothing to do with the crowds she had just escaped and everything to do with the man she knew was standing in the doorway behind her. She could feel his presence like a physical weight, the air between them charged with electricity and unresolved history. "I was not following you," Andrew said quietly, his voice carrying across the small space with painful familiarity. "I just needed air too. I can go back inside if you want to be alone." "Stay," Karen heard herself say, surprising them both with the invitation. "We are both adults. We can share a balcony for a few minutes without the world ending." He moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain distance, both of them staring out at the view rather than looking at each other. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they had never properly said, with all the conversations that should have happened but never did. Karen could feel the tension radiating from him, could sense his struggle to find words adequate for the moment. "You gave a beautiful speech inside," Andrew finally said, his voice rough with emotion he was trying to control. "About rebuilding after devastation, about refusing to let betrayal define your future. It was powerful, Karen, you were powerful. I sat there listening to you and realized I was witnessing exactly what I destroyed, exactly what I threw away, and I felt proud and devastated in equal measure." "Thank you," she said stiffly, uncomfortable with his praise, uncertain how to receive compliments from someone who had once destroyed her so completely. "I have been trying to stay away from you," Andrew continued, his words spilling out like he had been holding them back too long. "Trying to respect your wishes and leave you in peace. But seeing you tonight, seeing how incredible you have become, I cannot keep pretending I do not still think about you constantly, that I do not regret every single day what I threw away. Karen, you were everything I should have protected, and instead I destroyed you. And watching you thrive despite what I did is the most beautiful and painful thing I have ever witnessed." "Andrew, do not," Karen said, her voice tight with warning. "Do not do this. Do not make this complicated when it has finally become simple." "It has never been simple," he replied, finally turning to face her, and the raw pain in his eyes made her breath catch despite her determination to remain unmoved. "I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was weak and stupid and believed my mother's poison over my own heart. I threw away a woman who loved me unconditionally for a fake pregnancy and a business legacy that meant nothing. Everything I touched turned to ash, Karen, and I deserved every bit of it. But knowing I deserved my suffering does not make it easier to live with the knowledge that I hurt you, that I damaged something irreplaceable, that I chose wrong at every single turn. Karen felt something crack inside her chest. All the rage and grief and confusion she had been suppressing suddenly flooding through the barriers she had built. Her hands gripped the railing until her knuckles turned white, her whole body trembling with the effort of maintaining her composure when everything inside her wanted to scream. "You want to know what the worst part was?" she said, her voice shaking with intensity she could no longer contain. "It was not the affair or the pregnancy or even the cruelty of what you said that last night. It was realizing that you never really loved me at all. You loved the idea of me, the convenience of having a supportive wife who made your life easier and never demanded too much. But the actual me, the woman with dreams and flaws and a body that might not produce heirs on command, that woman you threw away without a second thought the moment she became inconvenient to your plans." "That is not true," Andrew protested desperately. "I did love you, Karen. I still love you. I was just too damaged and too weak to love you the way you deserved. My mother spent years poisoning me with racist garbage about your family, about your background, about how you were not good enough for our family. She made me believe that loving you was a betrayal of everything I was supposed to be, everything I was supposed to want. And I believed her because it was easier than fighting, easier than standing up for what I knew in my heart was right. Then you were a coward," Karen said coldly, the word cutting through the night air like a blade. "You were a coward who valued his inheritance and his mother's approval more than his marriage. You were a coward who made unilateral decisions about my body and my future without ever giving me a choice, or even the courtesy of honesty. You were a coward who replaced me and then acted shocked when I would not forgive you for it. You were a coward in every way that mattered, Andrew. And your belated bravery means nothing because it comes years too late to repair what you destroyed." "You are absolutely right," Andrew said, tears streaming down his face now, his composure finally shattering completely. "I was all of those things. I'm still working every day not to be those things anymore. But I have spent years trying to understand what I did wrong, trying to become someone who might deserve even a fraction of what you gave me. I know I cannot fix what I broke. I know you will never forgive me, and you should not. But I need you to know that losing you taught me what actually matters in this world. And everything I do now is an attempt to honor what you survived because of my cruelty, to make some small amends for the devastation I caused." Karen felt her own tears falling. Hot and furious, all the grief she had been holding finally breaking through the dam she had constructed. Her chest heaved with sobs she could not quite suppress, years of suppressed emotion demanding release. She turned away from him, not wanting him to see her fall apart, not willing to give him the satisfaction of witnessing how deeply he could still wound her. "You do not get to make your redemption my burden," she said, her voice breaking around the words. "You do not get to tell me about your growth and your understanding and expect me to absolve you of what you did. I survived despite you, Andrew, not because of you. I built myself back from absolutely nothing while you got to learn valuable life lessons from destroying me. Do not stand here and ask me to celebrate your evolution when it came at the cost of my complete devastation. That is not fair. That is not right. That is you being selfish one more time, asking me to carry the weight of making you feel better about the terrible things you did." "I am not asking for anything," Andrew said quietly, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. "I am just telling you the truth, because I think you deserve to hear it, even if hearing it changes nothing between us. I was a monster who destroyed something precious. You deserved so much better than what I gave you, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for what I did, even though nothing I do will ever be enough to balance the scales or repair the damage I caused." Karen stared at him through her tears, at this man who had once been her entire world, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. She did hate him, But Jasmine had been right that her hatred was just love that had been poisoned by betrayal, that her continued anger was proof she still cared enough to be wounded by what he had done. She wanted to be indifferent, wanted to feel nothing when she looked at him, but indifference required an absence of feeling she had never achieved despite years of trying. "I hate you," she said, the words torn from somewhere deep and raw, from a place she usually kept locked away. "I hate you for destroying something that could have been beautiful. I hate you for making me doubt my own worth for years. I hate you for letting your mother's racism destroy our marriage when you should have fought for us. I hate you for everything you took from me, for every dream you killed, for every piece of myself I had to rebuild from ashes. But mostly I hate you for changing, for becoming someone who might have been worth keeping if you had found this version of yourself while I still loved you enough to try again." "I am sorry," Andrew whispered, his voice breaking completely. "I'm so incredibly sorry for all of it, for every moment of pain, for every tear you cried, for every night you spent alone rebuilding what I destroyed. I'm sorry that my apology means nothing, that my understanding came too late, that I cannot undo what I did or give you back what I took. I'm just sorry, Karen, for being the kind of person who could hurt you that way." They stood together in the wreckage of their history, two people who had loved and destroyed each other. Bound by shared trauma they could never fully escape. Karen felt exhausted suddenly, bone-deep tired of carrying the weight of their past, of letting his betrayal define the boundaries of her future, of holding on to anger that served no purpose except to keep her chained to someone who no longer deserved space in her heart. "I found out the infertility diagnosis was wrong," she said, the confession escaping before she could stop it, before she could protect him from this final devastating truth. "My body is fine. I can have children if I want them. You destroyed our marriage over outdated information you never bothered to verify, Andrew. You threw me away for absolutely nothing. You ruined both our lives over a lie you could have easily disproven if you had cared enough to actually investigate, instead of just accepting the easiest excuse to replace me." The devastation on his face was absolute, his legs seeming to weaken beneath him. He gripped the railing for support, his entire body shaking with the force of this revelation. "No," he breathed, the word barely audible. "Karen, no. Please tell me you're lying. Please tell me I did not destroy us over something that was not even real." "You did," she confirmed, her voice steady despite the tears still falling. "You absolutely did. You decided I was broken without ever fighting for me, without ever believing in us enough to search for solutions or second opinions. You took the easy path and replaced me with someone you thought could give you what you wanted, and now you get to live with knowing how catastrophically wrong you were about everything. You threw away a woman who could have given you the family you claimed to need so desperately. You destroyed a real future chasing a fake one. That is what you did, Andrew. That is what you have to live with now." "I do not know how to survive this," Andrew said, his voice cracking completely, tears streaming unchecked down his face. "I do not know how to live with what I have done to you, with how completely I destroyed everything that mattered. Karen, how do I breathe knowing that I ruined both our lives over something that was never even true?" "You figure it out the same way I did," Karen said, her tone hardening even as her own tears continued to fall. "You wake up every day and choose to keep breathing, even when it feels impossible. You build something from the ashes of what you destroyed. You become someone new because the person you were is too damaged and broken to continue existing. You survive, Andrew, because the alternative is unacceptable. You survive because other people are depending on you, because giving up would let your cruelty win, because you owe it to everyone you hurt to at least try to become better." She turned toward the door, ready to leave him there with his grief and his guilt, ready to return to the life she had built without him. But his next words stopped her cold, pierced through her armor in ways she had not expected. "I never stopped loving you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of absolute truth. I never moved on, or found someone else, or built a life that did not include the ghost of what we had. I've been alone since you left, Karen, because no one else could ever be you, and you are the only person I ever wanted. I destroyed the only thing that mattered, and I have spent every day since then living in the ruins of that destruction, trying to become someone who might have deserved you if I had found this understanding sooner." Karen closed her eyes against the pain of hearing words she once would have given anything to hear. Words that came years too late to change anything. Words that only made the waste of everything more devastating. "That is not my problem anymore," she said, her voice gentler now, but no less final. "Your loneliness is not my responsibility to fix. Your regret is not my burden to carry. I'm happy now, Andrew. I have a life and a career and a future that belongs entirely to me. I do not need your love or your apology or your continued suffering. I just need you to let me go, to finally release me from the ghost of what we were, so I can fully inhabit what I have become." "I do not know how," he admitted, his voice barely audible, raw with vulnerability and pain. "I do not know how to let go of the only thing I ever truly loved." "You learn," Karen said simply, opening her eyes and meeting his gaze one final time. "The same way I learned to let go of the woman I was when I believed in us. The same way I learned to build a life that did not include you, or need you, or depend on your validation. You learn, Andrew, because you do not have any other choice. Because holding on to something that no longer exists will destroy whatever chance you have at peace. Because I am asking you to, and if you ever actually loved me, you will respect this final request." She walked away then, leaving him alone on the balcony with the city lights and the wreckage of everything they had once been. Inside, the gala continued without them, full of people who had no idea about the private devastation unfolding just beyond their awareness. Karen found Patricia in the crowd and made her excuses, suddenly desperate to leave, to escape before the emotions churning inside her demanded more expression than she was willing to give in public. Patricia drove her home without asking questions, offering silent support that Karen accepted gratefully. When they pulled up to her apartment, Patricia finally spoke, her voice carrying decades of hard-won wisdom. "Whatever happened tonight, whatever was said, remember that you do not owe anyone access to your healing. You get to protect your peace, Karen. You get to choose who deserves space in your life and who has forfeited that privilege through their own actions." Karen nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat, and fled to her apartment, where she finally allowed herself to completely fall apart. She cried for hours, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body, grieving for the marriage she had lost and the man Andrew could have been if he had found his courage sooner. She cried for the woman she used to be, the one who believed in forever and happily ever after. She cried for all the wasted years and missed opportunities and paths not taken. But when the tears finally stopped and dawn began to break over the city, Karen felt something like peace settling into her bones. She had confronted Andrew, had told him exactly what his betrayal had cost her, had refused to absolve him or make his redemption easier. She had been honest about her anger and her pain and her continued inability to forgive him. And somehow, that honesty had lifted a weight she had not realized she was still carrying. She could not forgive him, might never forgive him, but she no longer needed his destruction to feel whole. She was whole already, she realized again, built from her own strength and determination. And that wholeness had nothing to do with him or his apologies or his transformation. It belonged entirely to her, earned through survival and perseverance, and the absolute refusal to let his betrayal define the limits of her existence. Chapter 10. The Beginning. Karen stood in her new office, boxes still unpacked around her, and tried to absorb the reality that this space belonged to her now. Patricia had officially retired, passing her practice to Karen with a ceremony that felt simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The nameplate on the door read her name in letters that seemed impossibly large. announcing to the world that she had not just survived, but thrived beyond anyone's expectations, including her own. She had not seen or heard from Andrew in over a year, not since that devastating conversation on the balcony when she had finally released the anger she had been carrying like armor. She occasionally heard his name mentioned in passing, whispers that he was doing good work helping people who needed advocacy, that he had completely transformed his approach to wealth and power. She felt nothing when she heard these updates, genuinely nothing, and that indifference was perhaps the greatest gift his absence had given her. Her life had become full in ways she never imagined possible. She had clients who trusted her, colleagues who respected her, a reputation built on competence and integrity rather than connections or manipulation. She dated occasionally, but remained emotionally unavailable in ways she no longer felt guilty about, protecting her hard-won peace with boundaries that kept everyone at a safe distance. Perhaps one day she would be ready to risk her heart again, but that day remained comfortably distant. The buzzer sounded, announcing a visitor, and Karen checked her schedule with confusion because she had no appointments listed. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom, apologetic and uncertain. "There is someone here to see you without an appointment. He says it is personal and urgent. His name is Andrew Johnson." Karen's heart lurched despite her best efforts at indifference, her carefully constructed equilibrium suddenly precarious. She could refuse to see him, could send him away with a message that she had nothing left to say. But curiosity won over caution, that same stubborn refusal to run that had defined her survival. "Send him in," she heard herself say, already regretting the decision but unable to take it back. Andrew entered her office, looking somehow both better and worse than when she had last seen him. He was thinner, his face marked by the kind of suffering that leaves permanent shadows. But his eyes held a clarity that had been absent during their balcony confrontation. "I know I have no right to be here," he began without preamble, standing awkwardly in front of her desk. "I know you told me to let you go, and I have tried. But something happened that you need to know about, and I could not let you hear it from anyone else." "What is it?" Karen asked, her professional demeanor firmly in place, despite the turmoil churning beneath her surface calm. "My mother is dying," Andrew said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Cancer, aggressive and terminal. She has maybe a month left. And before she goes, she insisted on writing you a letter, an apology for everything she did to destroy our marriage. She wants to meet with you, to confess her role in poisoning me against you, to take responsibility for the racism and manipulation that led to our destruction." Karen stared at him, unable to process this information, unsure how she was supposed to feel about the woman who had systematically undermined her marriage, finally acknowledging her cruelty. "Why would I agree to that?" she asked carefully. "What could your mother possibly say now that would change anything?" "Nothing," Andrew admitted. "It would change absolutely nothing, but she is insisting that she needs to do this before she dies, that she cannot go to whatever comes next without trying to make amends. I told her you owed her nothing, that you had every right to refuse, but she begged me to at least ask." "Does she know?" Karen asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Does she know about the infertility diagnosis being wrong? About how completely her interference destroyed something that could have been repaired if you had been honest with me?" "She knows everything," Andrew said heavily. "I told her all of it, every terrible detail of what her racism cost us both. She has been living with that knowledge for years now, and I think the guilt is eating her alive more effectively than the cancer." Karen walked to her window and stared out at the city, trying to decide what she owed the dying woman who had helped destroy her marriage. Part of her wanted to refuse out of pure spite, to deny Constance the absolution she sought and let her die with the weight of her sins unconfessed. But another part recognized that seeing Constance might provide closure she had not realized she still needed. "I will think about it," Karen said finally, turning back to face Andrew. "That is all I can promise. I will consider her request and let you know." "Thank you," Andrew said quietly. "That is more grace than either of us deserve." He turned to leave, but Karen's voice stopped him at the door. "Are you taking care of yourself?" she asked, the question surprising them both with its genuine concern. "I am surviving," Andrew replied with a sad smile, "taking it one day at a time, trying to be someone who might deserve peace someday, even if I never achieve it." "Are you happy, Karen?" She considered the question carefully, examining her life with honest assessment. "I am content," she said finally. "I have work that matters and a life that belongs entirely to me. I'm not sure I know how to be happy anymore, but I am not miserable. That feels like enough." "You deserve so much more than enough," Andrew said softly. "You deserve everything." He left before she could respond, and Karen sat in her office, surrounded by the evidence of her success, and felt strangely hollow. She thought about Constance's request, about whether confronting the woman who had poisoned her marriage would bring healing or just reopen wounds that had finally begun to scar over. After days of deliberation, Karen agreed to visit Constance, driven more by morbid curiosity than any desire for reconciliation. She found the dying woman in a private room at an expensive hospice facility, her body ravaged by disease, but her spirit apparently still fierce enough to demand this final confession. "Thank you for coming," Constance said, her voice weak but steady. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I did." "You do not," Karen agreed, sitting in the chair beside the bed, but maintaining emotional distance. "So say what you need to say and let me decide whether it matters." Constance spent an hour detailing her crimes, confessing how she had systematically undermined Karen and Andrew's marriage from the beginning, how she had fed Andrew lies about Karen trying to trap him, how she had found the old medical records and presented them as proof that Karen was defective and unsuitable. She admitted her racism openly, acknowledged that she had wanted Andrew to marry someone white and wealthy and properly connected, that she had seen Karen as an obstacle to be removed rather than a person deserving respect. "I was wrong about everything," Constance said finally, tears streaming down her ruined face. "You were exactly what Andrew needed, and I destroyed you both because I could not see past my own bigotry and snobbery. I'm sorry, Karen, I'm so desperately sorry for all of it." Karen listened without interrupting, letting Constance purge her guilt without offering absolution or forgiveness. When the confession finally ended, Karen stood to leave, her expression neutral and her heart unmoved by the dying woman's tears. "Your apology changes nothing," Karen said quietly but firmly. "It does not undo the damage or repair what you helped destroy. I hope it brings you peace as you face whatever comes next, but it brings me nothing except confirmation that I was right to leave. You and Andrew both chose yourselves over me, and now you both get to live with those choices. Goodbye, Constance." She walked out without looking back, leaving the dying woman with her regrets and her belated understanding. Andrew waited in the hallway, clearly having expected some dramatic reconciliation or emotional breakthrough that had not materialized. "She apologized," Karen said to his unspoken question. "I listened. That is all either of you deserved from me." "Karen, please," Andrew began, but she cut him off with a gesture. "I am done, Andrew. I'm done carrying anger about what happened. I am done letting your mistakes and your mother's cruelty define my capacity for peace. I am done with all of it. I hope you find happiness. I hope you build a good life. But I need you to understand that our story is over, permanently and completely. There is no reunion waiting at the end of this, no moment where I suddenly forgive everything and we try again. We are finished. Accept that and move forward." "I understand," Andrew said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I just want you to know that loving you was the best thing I ever did, even if destroying that love was the worst. You were everything, Karen. You still are. Karen left the hospice with those words echoing in her mind, feeling nothing except relief that this chapter of her life was finally, irrevocably closed. She drove home through the city she had claimed as her own, past the apartment building where she had once seen her world shatter, past the modest places where she had rebuilt herself, piece by painful piece, toward the future that belonged entirely to her. Years passed, with their own complications and struggles. Karen's practice thrived, but success came with exhausting hours and difficult cases that sometimes kept her awake at night. She dated men who seemed promising until they revealed their own damage, their own incapacity for the kind of partnership she needed. She went to therapy regularly, still unpacking layers of trauma that surfaced at unexpected moments, still learning how to trust without the paralyzing fear of betrayal. She met Thomas during a particularly grueling case, a legal consultant who challenged her intellectually and respected her boundaries without making her feel broken for having them. Their relationship developed slowly, cautiously, built on honest conversations about past wounds and present limitations. He had his own scars from a divorce that had taught him humility, his own wariness about promising forever when forever had already failed him once. They were two damaged people choosing each other anyway, building something imperfect and real. When Karen became pregnant, the joy was complicated by terror that something would go wrong, that her body would betray her the way Andrew had claimed it would. The pregnancy was difficult, marked by complications that required bed rest and constant monitoring, by moments when she questioned whether pursuing motherhood was worth the risk. Thomas held her through panic attacks triggered by medical appointments, reminded her that she was strong enough to survive whatever came. Never promised that everything would be fine, because they both knew life offered no such guarantees. She gave birth to twins after a labor that lasted hours longer than expected, exhausted and frightened and overwhelmed by the reality of two tiny humans who depended on her completely. Thomas stood beside her, radiating love, mixed with his own terror about fatherhood, both of them fumbling through those first weeks with more questions than answers. The babies cried constantly, refused to sleep on any schedule, tested every limit of Karen's patience and endurance. Some days she looked at her children and felt nothing but resentment for how they had stolen her sleep and her peace and her carefully reconstructed life. Other days she held them and cried with gratitude that Andrew's cruelty had not stolen this possibility from her, that her body had proven capable despite his dismissal. Motherhood was not the blissful transformation she had imagined during her marriage, but rather a daily choice to keep showing up even when she felt inadequate and exhausted. She thought about Andrew sometimes, wondered if he had found any measure of peace in his solitude. She heard he had never remarried, never had the children he claimed to need so desperately, devoted himself instead to work that helped others build what he had destroyed in himself. She felt neither satisfaction nor guilt about his choices, simply recognized that they had both survived their shared devastation in different ways. Both carried scars that would never fully heal. Her daughter had Andrew's eyes, a detail that startled Karen the first time she noticed it, that still occasionally caused her breath to catch when the light hit just right. But the little girl was entirely her own person, fierce and stubborn, and nothing like the man whose genetics she partially carried. Karen refused to let that resemblance define her child or summon ghosts that had no place in this hard-won life. Thomas was not perfect, brought his own frustrations and failings to their partnership. He worked too much, withdrew into silence when stressed, sometimes made her feel alone even when he was physically present. They fought about money and parenting and the division of labor that never felt entirely equal. But he stayed through her worst moments, never weaponized her vulnerabilities, proved day after ordinary day that he had chosen her and would keep choosing her even when choosing her was inconvenient or difficult. Karen stood in the nursery one evening after finally getting both children to sleep, her body aching with exhaustion, her mind too tired to think clearly. She looked around at the chaos of toys and diapers and half-finished laundry, at the evidence of a life that bore no resemblance to the fantasy she had once imagined. This was not the fairy tale ending she had dreamed of during her marriage, but it was real and earned and entirely hers. She thought about the woman at the traffic light, the one whose world had shattered in an instant, and felt profound gratitude for that devastating moment. Andrew's betrayal had destroyed her illusions about what love required, forced her to build something stronger from the ruins of her naivety. She had learned that survival was possible, that building a life on realistic foundations was more valuable than preserving beautiful lies, that contentment earned through struggle meant more than happiness handed to you untested. The traffic light that had once marked the end of everything now felt like the beginning of wisdom, the moment when she stopped being a girl who believed in perfect love and became a woman who understood that real love was messy and complicated and required daily choices rather than eternal promises. Andrew's betrayal had not destroyed her after all. It had simply forced her to become someone capable of surviving destruction, someone strong enough to build something real from the ashes of fantasy. The city lights twinkled outside her window, and Karen allowed herself a tired smile, at peace not because her life was perfect, but because it was authentically hers, built from her own choices and determination, rather than someone else's vision of what she should want.